There's a kind of man that you don't hear about too often. And it's not because he doesn't exist, but because we've never actually made room for his story. He's the one who felt everything a little too deeply, who noticed more than he wanted to, or who cried easily and asked the big questions and got quiet when the world felt too loud. He wasn't weak, he wasn't dramatic, he wasn't broken, he was sensitive. But instead of being seen as a gift, he learned early that it was more of a liability, a target, a thing to fix or hide or to outgrow. Maybe he was told to man up, or especially when he cried after losing a pet, say. Or maybe his friends called him names when he hesitated before a fight. Maybe he asked a girl how she felt and she laughed, not knowing what to do with a boy who actually cared. And so he adjusted. He laughed it off. He bit his tongue. He practiced being chill and being cool and being unaffected. And the more that he performed that version of himself, the more people rewarded him. Oh, you're so easygoing, they would say, right? Or you're not like other guys. Or you're always so calm. They didn't realize that what they were praising was the mask. And under the mask lived a boy who had quietly decided that the world couldn't handle the real version of him. So what happens when you grow up believing that your deepest, truest instincts, the things that make you most human, are wrong? Well, you start to live from the outside in. You manage impressions instead of building connections. And you become fluent in performing safety, especially while starving for this sense of authenticity. And here's the kicker. Well, when that boy becomes a man and someone finally wants to love him for who he is, he doesn't know how to show up. He's learned to hide so well that he can't find the door back to himself, in essence. This is the paradox of male sensitivity. You grow up too soft for the world, only to become too hard for love. Because in learning to survive a world that rejected your tenderness, you instead end up rejecting the very thing that makes deep connection possible. And yet, it's not your fault. No one ever taught you that sensitivity was a strength, and that noticing mattered, and that emotional depth wasn't a failure of masculinity, but the very foundation of it. So instead, most sensitive men were forced into silence by a culture that treats vulnerability as weakness. And and it starts early. I mean, think back to how we treat boys who cry in public. We rush to hush them, right? And distract them and tell them it's not a big deal, but what we're really saying is your feelings are making me uncomfortable, so tone it down. By the time these boys reach middle school, they've learned the social cost of being open. And so they shut down and they get funny and athletic and smart, whatever helps them fit in without standing out emotionally. And those who don't, they're labeled soft or weird or worse. So they adapt in the only ways it seems to work, and that's numbness. Not because they want to disconnect, but because it's far safer than risking more rejection. And yet, the cost of that safety is steep because you can't selectively numb. When you suppress sadness and fear and vulnerability, you end up dulling your joy and your awe and the capacity to love fully. You become emotionally fragmented in grayscale while longing for color. And then one day, someone enters your life and says, I want to know the real you. And suddenly, the very skills that kept you safe now keep you stuck. So how do you offer your heart to someone when you've spent years burying it? How do you trust love when your earliest experiences taught you that love disappears the moment that you get too honest? That's the tension that so many sensitive men carry. This longing to be seen, but terrified that being seen means that they're going to be rejected. Craving closeness, but conditioned to stay guarded. So they hover at the edge of intimacy. Present, but not fully. Affectionate, but it's filtered. And loyal, but distance. And the people who love them, partners, friends, family, they can feel that emotional hesitation. They can sense that there's more beneath the surface, but every attempt to draw it out gets met with silence or deflection or retreat. And it's not because these men don't want to be close, but it's because closeness feels dangerous, especially when you've been punished for your depth. This isn't just a personal pattern, it's a cultural epidemic, I would say. We've built a version of masculinity that thrives on stoicism and invulnerability and self-reliance. But then we wonder why so many men are struggling to express themselves and to connect authentically, or even to maintain emotional intimacy. So we set up these men to fail and then shame them when they do. And for sensitive men, the stakes feel even higher because they already feel out of place, right? Already they feel too much. They're on the edge of being misunderstood. And so they fold themselves into smaller shapes and they become palatable, agreeable, or non-threatening. Until one day they look in the mirror and they don't recognize themselves anymore. They wonder where their fire went, where their softness disappeared, and why they feel like a stranger in their own heart. And the world, instead of offering them a path that feels like home, it says instead, you've changed, or you're distant, or why can't you just open up? But how do you open up when every early attempt was just shut down? How do you unfold when the world has trained you to armor up? How do you trust love when you've only ever been taught to survive? Let's maybe just zoom out for a moment, shall we? See, the emotional suppression of boys isn't just a parenting issue. It's a systems issue. It's embedded in the schools. It's embedded in our sports teams, our media, our peer culture. It's in how we talk about leadership and power and even respect. It's in the way that we treat boys who are sensitive as projects instead of people, and things to fix instead of stories that we listen to. And when a sensitive boy shows up in a group, when he's quiet and thoughtful and maybe more expressive than the rest, he's often met with suspicion. He doesn't fit. He doesn't match the energy. He doesn't follow the script of performative toughness. And so the script begins. Toughen up. Don't show weakness. Don't take things so personally. Be a man, right? And that script doesn't just shape how others treat him. It also reshapes how he sees himself. And so he starts to believe that sensitivity is more of a design flaw, that he needs to get better at faking it, and that one day he's finally man enough that these feelings won't hurt so much. But here's the secret that no one tells him. It doesn't stop hurting. You just get better at pretending that it doesn't. And that pretending, it works for a while. It helps you blend in and maybe get ahead and avoid awkward moments. But then love shows up. Not performance love, but the kind that actually rewards who you appear to be. Real love, the kind that asks for the parts that you've hidden, right? The kind that says, let me in, show me where it hurts, because I'm going to stay. And for a sensitive man who's been armoring himself for years, that kind of love feels terrifying. Because love, by its nature, is disarming. It exposes, it requires. Love just doesn't tolerate emotion. It needs it. It needs vulnerability and softness and responsiveness. It needs that same depth that the world told you to smother. So now you're standing at a crossroads. Do you risk being fully seen, knowing that has cost you deeply before? Or do you keep hiding, knowing that it's killing your chance at real connection? It's a brutal position to be in. Um, and some sensitive men try to split the difference. They offer safe vulnerability, which is a rehearsed version of openness that never risks too much. They share stories without feelings, perhaps, or insights without intimacy. They intellectualize instead of internalizing. But love is not fooled, and neither are the people who are trying to reach them. Others, however, will go the opposite route. They try to rush through vulnerability and hope that if they just get it all out quickly, they'll skip the discomforts. They trauma dump, they overshare, they place their emotional world in someone's lap and say, here, fix me. But that's not intimacy either, because that's fear in a different costume. See, true intimacy requires presence and pacing and permission. It requires trusting not just the other person, but also yourself. To stay open without needing to control every outcome. And that kind of trust, it's hard earned, especially for sensitive men whose earlier experiences taught them that their softness would be used against them. So many men retreat, not because they don't want love, but more so because they've never seen a version of love where they were allowed to bring their whole self. What they've seen instead, however, is mockery and abandonment and misunderstanding. And so they conclude, I am too much, or worse, I am unlovable. And that belief just, it doesn't just affect the romantic relationships, it leaks everywhere. Friendships become shallow, professional, emotions will stay behind closed doors. Even in those moments of joy, there's a part of him that holds back because showing too much happiness might lead to him showing too much sadness. And that door has a lock on it. This is what emotional exile looks like. It's not just being alone, it's being alone with yourself, because the whole world trained you to be suspicious even of your own heart. And the longer this goes on, the more likely it is that sensitivity, which once made you vibrant and intuitive and deeply connected, it now starts to feel like a burden. And so you begin to resent it, and you wonder why you feel more than others, why things stick with you longer, and why relationships are harder to navigate, why the world seems louder and sharper and more disappointing. And so you start seeing your sensitivity not as a superpower, but as a sentence. And you look around and you think, everyone else seems to be doing fine. Why am I like this? But here's what you don't see. So many other men are living the same story, quietly, painfully, invisibly. They're the ones who hesitate before speaking, are afraid of saying too much, the ones who scroll through old conversations, wondering if they were too honest. The ones who cry alone in their car but show up smiling. They're not broken. They're not failures. They're not weak. They are sensitive men who are trying to survive in this world that made no room for their sensitivity. And they've been forced to make an impossible choice. Harden to survive, or stay soft and risk being hurt again. What if that choice isn't real though? What if there is another way? What if the solution isn't to stop being sensitive, but to stop being alone in it? What if sensitivity doesn't need to be hardened, but instead just held? Because here's the truth that not many tell you. Sensitivity was never the problem. Isolation was. You were never meant to feel this much alone. You were never meant to carry grief without a witness, to process betrayal without support, right? To experience joy without someone to celebrate it with. But when you're a sensitive man in a world that rewards numbness, you learn very quickly that your inner world must remain private, that it's far safer to suffer in silence than to risk being misunderstood out loud. And so the pain compounds, not just the pain of rejection, but the pain of hiding. Hiding is its own trauma. It splits you in two. Like there's a version that you show the world and the version that you actually are. And the longer you perform the role of the one who's easygoing, the more disconnected you also feel from the man who's dying to be known. And eventually that disconnect, it catches up with you. It shows up as burnout, as anxiety, as emotional flatness. You find yourself in relationships where you feel unseen, even though you were technically always there. And you might even end up with people who love your sensitivity, but only when it benefits them. People who praise your emotional intelligence until you ask for your own needs to be met. And then suddenly you're too much again. And that pattern reinforces everything that you've been fearing. Your softness makes you disposable, and your needs are inconvenient. And you were better off when you were quiet. But pause a moment with me, will you? Because this is the moment in the storyline where everything can shift if we let it. Because being too soft for the world does not mean that you're too soft for life. It means you haven't yet found the spaces and the relationships, the connections that can match your emotional depth. And basically means that you've been adapting to survive in an environment that was never built with you in mind. And what's tragic is how many sensitive men just stop here. They retreat permanently. They give up on love that sees them, on friendships that nourish them, and on lives that actually reflect who they really are on the inside. They tell themselves, maybe I'm just meant to be alone. Maybe I feel too much to function. But that is the voice of survival, not the voice of truth. Because your sensitivity is not a dysfunction. It's wisdom, it's clarity, it's your inner compass telling you what matters. It's the part of you that notices injustice and beauty and pain and wonder. It's what allows you to listen better and love deeper and connect harder. But it can't thrive in a vacuum. It was never meant to. So if you're a sensitive man and you're tired of pretending or of explaining or of apologizing, I want you to hear this. You're not the problem. The world is just behind. Behind on building spaces that honor your nuance. Behind on recognizing the power of tenderness. behind on celebrating men, not for how well they hide, but how bravely they reveal. And yes, healing this aspect won't happen overnight. Because while your sensitivity is a strength, it's also carried years of misunderstanding and shame and grief. And that stuff doesn't just evaporate. It needs to be named, and it needs to be held and processed. You'll have to grieve the relationships where you weren't met, and the moments you minimized your needs just to stay included. The times you said, "I'm fine," when what you really meant to say was, "I feel invisible." You'll also have to unlearn your own bias against yourself. The subtle belief that you're somehow less of a man, less valuable, less wanted because you feel deeply. And that unlearning, it's brutal, because part of you might still believe that if you were just a little more detached, a little less intense, a little easier to digest, maybe then you'd be chosen. But what if the real truth is the opposite? What if the very thing you've been trying to tone down is what someone out there is actually longing to experience? Someone who wants to know the real you, who sees your feeling not as fragility, but as freedom, who's not asking you to be less, but asking you to be all of you. And what if that starts not with waiting to be discovered, but instead choosing to show up differently? What if you began to live like your softness wasn't shame, but a strategy for healing the world? Because it is. Every time a man speaks from the heart instead of from a script, the world begins to shift. Every time a man says, "Ooh, that hurt me," instead of laughing at it, that's someone who's learning what real strength looks like. Every time a man cries without apology, and holds space without performance, and listens without needing to fix, he becomes a living invitation for something new. And this is how we build the world that we were told to suppress ourselves in. Not by numbing, not by posturing, not by pretending that we don't care, but instead by caring anyway, by feeling, by loving despite. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Because sensitivity is only a curse in a world that refuses to honor it. But in the right space, with the right people, it becomes the very thing that brings us back to life. So, how do we start? How do you, as a sensitive man, or someone who loves one, how do you begin to dismantle the emotional exile that keeps so many stuck in silence? You start by turning inward first with gentleness. You begin by asking, what part of me did I bury to survive? And then, am I ready to meet him again? This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about recovering someone old. And that's the version of you that existed before the world said, "That's too much." It's the boy who asked thoughtful questions. It's the teenager who felt heartbreak like a storm. This is the man who still cries at movies but hides it behind a cough. He never went away. He's just been waiting for permission, for space, for you to say, "I'm not ashamed of you anymore." And as you begin to reclaim that part, something powerful begins to happen. The armor starts to loosen. Not because you force yourself to open up, but because you stop believing that hiding was safer. And you begin to realize that vulnerability is not exposure, it's expansion. And that crying, it doesn't make you weak, it makes you whole. That sensitivity isn't the enemy, It's your invitation back to yourself. But here's where we must be honest. Not everyone will be ready for this version of you. Some will prefer the emotionally distant man who never pushed back, never asked for more, never broke the illusion of being fine. And when that happens, you will face a choice. Shrink again to stay, or stand firm in your new truths and risk outgrowing them. And that will hurt, because for sensitive men, disconnection isn't casual. It lingers. But so does integrity. And over time, you'll see that protecting your softness is worth the loss of anyone who demanded your numbness. Because love, like real love, is not threatened by your depth. It's actually drawn to it. It welcomes your nuance. It wants your questions. It wants to honor the way you see the world in the colors most people miss. And when you start showing up with that kind of fullness, yeah, some will leave, but others will draw in and lean closer. They'll say, I've never felt so seen. Thank you for saying what I couldn't find the words to describe. I did not know men could see like this, they might say. And they'll mean it. This is how you'll know that you're no longer too soft for this world. You've just found a softer world to belong to. And if you're listening to this thinking that says, I want that, but I don't know how to start, begin small. Share something honest, even if your voice is shaky. Tell a trusted friend what you've been carrying alone. Or write a letter to your younger version of yourself and say, I see you. I'm proud of you. I'm so sorry it took this long. And most importantly, I want you to consider forgiving yourself. Forgive yourself for all the ways that you disappeared just to be acceptable. Forgive yourself for all the times that you made yourself smaller, and quieter, and easier to love. Forgive yourself for believing that your depth was a burden and not a blessing, because you were surviving. And now it's time for you to live. And if you love a sensitive man, whether you're his partner or you're his friend or you're his sibling or a son, your job is not to fix him or toughen him up or pull him out of his depths. Your job is to meet him there, to sit in the deep end with him, to say, you don't have to be less for me to stay. That's how you build a relationship where sensitivity is not punished, but it's practiced. It's where emotions aren't an emergency, they're more of a language. Where being real doesn't make you risky, it makes you ready. Ready for connection, ready for love, ready for wholeness. Because the real paradox isn't that sensitive men are too soft for the world. The real paradox is that the world has forgotten softness was ever an option. But that's changing, isn't it? Like, it's changing right now as you're listening to this, with voices like ours, as we engage in this conversation, with every man who says, I feel deeply and I'm not ashamed of it. With every relationship that makes room for emotion instead of dismissing it. It changes with every community that chooses presence over performance. You are not too much. You are not too fragile. You are not too complicated. What you are is you are a mirror that the world needs to remember how to care and how to listen and how to love. And it's with your whole heart. And when you stop apologizing for your sensitivity, something beautiful, something wild happens. You, in essence, give others permission to stop apologizing as well. And that's not weakness. That's leadership. That's healing. That's the bridge back to us.